Hello, this is Kaga. Welcome back to the channel. This time I've prepared a brief little history introduction and replay for the Tier 4 Japanese carrier, the Houshou. Widely considered the first purpose-built commissioned aircraft carrier in the world, the Houshou is an interesting ship to look at and consider. Commissioned into the Imperial Japanese Navy in 1922, the ship became the blueprint and a source of valuable lessons for the emergent carrier arm of the IJN fleet under the restrictions imposed by the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922, which limited and halted many of the Japanese battleship and battlecruiser projects which were planned for in the early 1920s. Originally laid out with a small island which housed the bridge and air operations control centers, these were removed in mid 1924 to better accommodate air operations off the decks of the Houshou. The Houshou's military career was not restricted to testbed operations. She saw military operations during the Shanghai Incident of 1932 alongside IJN Kaga, my namesake in case you were curious, as a part of the 1st Carrier Division. Notable actions during this time included the bombing of Chinese airfields at Hongzhou and Suzhou. They were recalled after a ceasefire was declared between the Republic of China and the Empire of Japan. The Houshou, alongside a newly modernized IJN Kaga and the IJN Ryujo, was once again called upon during the Sino-Japanese War in late 1937, where her aircraft functioned in the ground support and bomber escort roles, before eventually transferring all of her aircraft to the Ryujo prior to being recalled to Japan. At this point, it was clear that the small size of her air group of just 15 aircraft would limit her utility in any future conflicts. This being said, she was utilized as an escort carrier during the initial phases of World War II. Most notably, the Houshou was present during the Battle of Midway, however, was 300 miles removed with the main fleet when the Nagumo fleet was devastated by bombers from both Midway Atoll and the 3 U.S. carriers dispatched to the vicinity. After which point the Houshou was unofficially transferred to the Mobile Force Training Force, I know that sounds silly in English, where she continued her service under the 50th Air Flotilla alongside IJN Ryuho as a training field for IJN pilots. During this time, her flight deck was widened and extended to be able to launch the newer generation of carrier-based aircraft like the Nakajima B-6N torpedo bomber and the Yokosuka D-4Y dive bomber. Despite being moored and camouflaged in Kure Bay, the Houshou suffered minor damage by air attack in July 1945. This damage was repaired before war's end. The Houshou has the distinction of being one of the few IJN carriers to have survived the war, probably due in no small part to spending most of that time in home waters. After the war, the ship was used to repatriate Japanese citizens and soldiers to the home islands up to August 1946. She was officially scrapped by May 1947. So this particular replay happens to occur on fault line in a standard battle. As you can see, the match is quite favorable for the Houshou. It's a tier 5 maximum game. The most unfortunate thing that we encounter is that there is an enemy Ziho to deal with at some point. But other than that, everything seems to be fairly well behaved as far as matches go. So we start this battle looking at the tactical map here and beginning to assign our squadrons some specific orders. I have, for the moment, the fighter set to orbit the carrier and defend it. This is mainly in response to the presence of the Zuiho on the enemy team. Meanwhile, I'm going to send squadrons 3 and 4, my torpedo bombers, to the gap in the islands near the ED boundary there, where you just saw that cruiser pop up, the Omaha. And we'll just try to get some initial damage before the intervention from the Langley on the enemy team occurs. And there's one thing that Japanese planes of the same tier do not fare well with, and that is same-tiered US Navy fighters. So we're trying to make these strikes fairly quickly, just do what we can when we can. So now we're starting to vector out these planes, and you'll notice that the Omaha is now beginning some erratic turns and maneuvers, and in a few seconds you'll see his fighter float plane get launched, and in response to this turn I decide to begin the attack run on this, and I've chosen Squadron 3 specifically in this case to watch so you can witness what happens when the fighter float planes engage a torpedo bomber squadron. As you can see, there's the nice manual drop in Squadron 4, and there's that nice fan spread that is a result of the bombers being engaged by the fighter. And then you see the other Allied Houshou begin his drops, and he must have done some quite lazy auto drops on that one, or just kind of had a computer malfunction or something, internet issue, because he dropped those into the cape of the island right there, and you can see that he stuck around too long, and that torpedo bomber squadron just got annihilated by Langley fighters. And it's worthy of note that when you're trying to deal with cruisers, sometimes the initial alpha damage that your torpedoes do is not as important as the flooding damage. And you can see that Omaha was at just about 3,000 health when he just disappeared. And you'll see him come up again real quick here, and now he's under 1,000, and it's kind of a shame we didn't pick up the kill on this one. As thank RNGesus on this one, because he stops flooding at 50 health. Kind of a shame there. So at this point, I'm pondering whether or not it's safe to engage that Myogi with the rearmed torpedo bomber squadrons. But at the same time, I noticed that in my direction of travel, there are 2 enemy cruisers only being engaged by one friendly cruiser who may eat a face full of torpedoes. He just ate them. So that's going to have to be my priority number 1. That Myogi is going to have to wait. Take a number, get in line, Myogi. These cruisers must come first. And I'll be the first to admit that I was still in the take the sight picture you can make and just drop when I came onto this Tenryu. And you can see from the bomber perspective at 4 that I am vectoring in towards these 2 cruisers and going to deal with the Tenryu first, because he's closer, has a little bit less AA ability than the Kuma. It's virtually non-existent, but it is still a factor, because biplanes are perhaps the most sensitive things to machine gun fire on the planet. So you're going to watch me here second guess my initial drop and screw it up. Mainly in response to that turn, but right about here you're going to see put that down. And if I'd been just a fraction of a second faster in determining that, would have got them off, and he probably would not have escaped. So what's happening here is he's trying to run aground to escape those torpedoes. You see those middle torpedo from that spread impact the stern of his ship, and then you see the rightmost torpedo in that spread actually impact the embankment of the beach there going into the sea. So that's not some bug. That is literally just the torpedo ran aground So now I do something that I can kind of get away with at tier 4, but this is a real mistake. To loiter the planes within the field of AA and try to go for a perfect shot. And as you can see, really only got one out of there because I went at a too extreme of an angle for a stop target. So only the one that hit his stern did damage, and the other one just barely missed his bow. At this point in time, I noticed those Ziho Alpha Strike Group bombers vectoring in towards our Houshou. So I see that he's got his fighters engaged and AA focusing down that group. So in an attempt to try to make these guys spread their torpedoes, I engage them, but the moment that they dropped their payload, I switched their target to deal with this other group, and the combined DPS from my fighters and the allied Houshou is enough to deal with these bombers before they get away. And you'll notice that the fighters are reporting that they're going to return to base. That is not a mistake, that is not a bug. That is because upon engaging that target, I gave them a secondary order to fulfill after that target was destroyed to return to the carrier by using the Shift F command, which will, as soon as the target is destroyed, will reclaim whatever is being assigned that order. And right now, don't you love DD spotting mechanics? Can't spot a Minekaze at the edge of a smoke screen when your planes are 700 meters from him. Oh, so I could have dropped. I in the end decided not to on that one because he was mostly dead, and for a little bit of change over 1,000 damage, it's not worth the bombers at that point. So I began re-vectoring them to deal with that Myogi that got away earlier. So at this point, you see my thought process developing a little more interestingly. At first, I'm thinking I'm going to send 4 to the north along with 3, and then I see him starting a maneuver, and then I vector 4 down south. At which point then I looked at the deployment and said, no, 4 should continue on course, 3 should go south. And then I spot this Clemson, and please note the site picture I'm going to use on this particular Clemson because it is so precious when things like this happen. And that is, it was a full health Clemson. Now it is a sunk Clemson. So you're going to see that extra order come up that it allow me to better vector these torpedoes onto target using a manual drop. And that's a pretty respectable spread. Myogi doesn't go quite fast enough to get that reliable 4th torpedo on there, but we'll take 3 out of 4. So reevaluating the positions on the map, you see that the destroyer has gone hunting for the carriers, and he's being pursued by 4 bomber squadrons after dealing with the enemy Langley, and he probably won't last much longer. So I begin the process to turn around because I really don't fancy my odds up there with only 1 ship between myself and another carrier, especially one that is a tier higher than me. Oh, those beautiful, beautiful, I suppose you might call them rippled crosshatch drop patterns that some carrier drivers like. So now we're reclaiming the bombers. Oh, and as an interesting note, you see those 2 elevators on the deck of the Houshou. Unlike a lot of other Japanese carriers which have a similar elevator setup, the Houshous actually, those elevators lead to separate hangars on the ship. That's right, there are two separate hangars on the same deck. It's interesting. So now you see that I'm in a bit of a hurry to get the next bomber group out there, so I delay the landing of 3 to get 4 up in the air, and I send them after the enemy battleship, which I believe is a New York, at G4. And I'm beginning to ask myself, well, where is the enemy Zuiho? I haven't seen him in a while, and his bombers have annihilated that destroyer. So, just taking a look at the map, I'm seeing those torpedo spreads from all those cruisers and destroyers and pondering that that New York is not going to last much longer. And while I'm doing that, I noticed the enemy bomber squadrons approaching the friendly fleet along that vector that puts him somewhere along that square of D1, D2 through F1, F2. So I start vectoring my bombers to fan the area a little bit and approach from the north, trying to gain a little bit more of the element of surprise in this attack. Granted, it's probably not necessary because a Zuiho is not equipped with fighters. Probably not, but better to follow a good pattern through towards upper tiers where you will be dealing with all kinds of fighter goodness. And you're going to notice right here that, that's weird. Last time I checked, bombers shouldn't go through islands. I suspect that that's probably because of the behavior of the group, the air group I mean, in question is defined by that center point where you see that dashed line coming out from. And because that point cleared that island, the computer determined that there was no need to animate the bombers going over there. And yes, you saw that right. An AA cannon just took out a bomber through a mountain. I love the attention to detail here. There's just so many nice animation things they could have done just a little bit better. And you see a fairly nice assault on that Zuiho, and I must apologize for the fighter that tried to think he was a submarine. I will discipline him later. And here we go. If I had been a little bit more up on the lead, could have just alpha'd this guy into death, but oh well. Hindsight, that's always perfect. But you're going to see that the flooding that was dealt to him, there we go, picked him up the kill. So here's the battle results screen, and you'll notice that this was not a particularly great round with only 13 torpedo hits and 2 ships sunk, but that's part of why I wanted to showcase this video. It's not all about the all-powerful carriers. Sometimes they have meh rounds, but even on a meh round, we still managed to top our team list for experience earned, picked up the Confederate, and managed to down 5 planes. Looks like those were all Zuiho bombers. But with 1800 experience and just a lick over 90,000 damage dealt, I'd have to say it was a pretty decent round. Nice and profitable. Houshou, great for making money. So thank you for watching. I hope to see you around. Good day.